Chapter 1. In the end, the winner will always be Lee Soo-hyuk. Our Hyuk, Light Soo-hyuk, Great Soo-hyuk, King Soo-hyuk, etc. Soo-hyuk had many embarrassing nicknames, all meant to praise his brilliant achievements and contributions. Earth, Murim, Runeterra, Alfredo, Tucan people from all sorts of worlds gathered at the tower. Among the players from Earth who were notably less capable was one outstanding individual. Lee Soo-hyuk. Is he a god? Is he a god? Is he a god? Mom, I want to be Lee Soo-hyuk when I grow up. Mom, I want to be Lee Soo-hyuk when I grow up. Mom, I want to be Lee Soo-hyuk when I grow up. He tore the competition apart. What an unimaginable being. Sound of someone taking off their underwear and screaming. Earth is something else. Calm down with that nonsense. It's just Lee Soo-hyuk who's awesome. Still, his followers are no joke. The members of Blue Eyes are on an entirely different level. Soo-hyuk had never lost in the interworld competition. He was the strongest player and the undefeated legend of Blue Eyes. Unfortunately, that legend was fading along with the rest of Blue Eyes. I think I'm going to die, Soo-hyuk muttered beneath his half-broken mask as he leaned against the wall. How many spears and knives were sticking out of his body? He'd lost so much blood that it was hard for him to stay awake. These bastards! He looked around and saw corpses lying on the ground. Most were the corpses of his enemies, but some were the lifeless bodies of the Blue Eyes Guild's members. They were the people who'd climbed the tower with him and some of the few he could call friends. You guys should have escaped when I told you to. Why did you have to be so stubborn? Soo-hyuk called out their names inwardly, one by one. Min-jae. He saw a corpse that had probably been hit by magic with a hole in his chest the size of a human head. Soo-hen? Another man had died with his eyes wide open in a kneeling position with both of his arms cut off. Finally, Ji-young. His gaze rested on the body of the man who'd stepped in front of him, took a flying sword for him, and died. Blood seeped out of the wound carved into his back. Did I ever tell you guys to die like this? You fools. 3 were dead, and 4 others were just barely clinging to life. Of the 4, 2 didn't look like they'd survive unless given immediate treatment. Can I save them? He asked himself as he glared from behind his mask at the culprits of the incident. The Murim Alliance was, as the name suggested, a large alliance of Murim players. Famous guilds such as the Namgung clan, the Seishin clan, and Hwashan were all part of it. Most players within the Murim Alliance kept their affiliations or identities unknown, though. Above all, the ones he hated the most among them were Blue Zone and Kim Il-soo. The Blue Zone Guild was a longtime ally of the Blue Eyes Guild and had participated in the Hydra raid with them. Instead of helping, though, they'd ambushed Soo-hyuk after the Hydra poisoned him. They were planning this from the beginning. No one will suspect anything if they say there was an accident during the Hydra raid. Soo-hyuk glanced back at the wall he had his back to. The solid black scales of the 8th floor dungeon's Poison Dragon Hydra made a good resting place. He was still surprised he'd been able to break through its scales. It was a common belief that the monster was impossible to raid, and he'd only defeated it through great effort and the assistance of the Blue Eyes Guild. If he managed to live and leave the dungeon, everyone would say, as expected of Lee Soo-hyuk, the Master of Lightning. Status: Poison. Natural healing is impossible. It didn't seem likely that he'd make it out alive. Fatigue: 95. Fatigue level is excessively high. Many problems arose from high fatigue, including reduced resistance to poison. Rather than rest, he needed immediate treatment. Given the circumstances, though, neither rest nor treatment seemed likely. He looked down at the sword in his hand. More than half of it had melted in the Hydra's poison, and the other half was as worn as a battered saw. He sighed and focused his glare on the people surrounding him again. He saw expressions of shock, surprise, relief, and many others. Why? He asked, focusing on one man in particular among all of the others around him. Why did you do this, you bastard? He continued in a rage-filled voice. Answer me, damn it. A lion was still a lion, even if it was exhausted and wounded. His roar caused the players around him to flinch. Tap, tap. A person stepped out from among them and replied, "We made a lot of preparations for this." The man, Kim Il-soo, had a kind demeanor, and he was Blue Zone's guild leader and a former ally of the Blue Eyes Guild. "I believed this would be the only way for us to defeat you. The others also weren't easy. In fact, they were tougher than I thought they'd be." Il-soo smirked. Soo-hyuk couldn't bear to see such an expression on the man's face. "I asked you why." Anger surged through his body. Was it due to the blood of his fallen comrades soaking through his shoes, or did his anger stem from the groans of his surviving friends? In the end, it didn't matter. "It's been 10 years, Soo-hyuk." Kim Il-soo didn't answer the question. Instead, he continued to speak as if he'd been waiting for the moment. "I've been preparing for this day for 10 years, so please be understanding." Kim Il-soo, "I'm sorry, but don't be too disappointed. Even after death, you'll be remembered as a hero." "Ha!" Soo-hyuk exhaled the breath he'd been holding. There was no reason to hold back anymore. Even at the end, he won't tell me why. No matter how much he thought about it, the betrayal was strange. Blue Eyes and Blue Zone had been allies for a long time, after all. On top of that, Kim Il-soo had founded Blue Zone and was a former member of Blue Eyes, which was why the names were so similar. Naturally, Soo-hyuk had trusted him. How could he have predicted that the man would betray such an alliance? What would he gain from the betrayal? He had many questions, but there were two things Soo-hyuk was certain of. Status, poisoned, has increased to level 2. For one, he was poisoned. For two, it would be difficult to survive in the state he was in. "I won't be able to hold out for long anyway." Despite his grim thoughts, Soo-hyuk remained calm on the outside. They didn't know his level of fatigue and could only guess. The Hydra had poisoned him, and there were dozens of holes in his body, but he wasn't going to let his spirits fall, even though death wasn't far off. "Still, I'm not going to just roll over and die. You know the saying, right?" he asked the enemies before him. "I've never said it myself, but they say." Soo-hyuk stared into Kim Il-soo's eyes. In the end, the winner will always be Lee Soo-hyuk. Though it was for a brief moment, Kim Il-soo's eyes trembled, and he took a slight step backward. That was enough. Taking advantage of the moment, Soo-hyuk opened his inventory and pulled out a large, colorful fan-shaped item. "That's..." Kim Il-soo's eyes widened in surprise as he recognized the fan, but it was too late for him to do anything. "Banana palm fan? Banana palm fan. Hashtag rank, legendary. Hashtag level requirement, 80. Hashtag an item containing the power of a strong wind that can blow a designated target over 10 kilometers away. Hashtag uses remaining. There's no way he still has uses left, right?" Kim Il-soo inwardly asked himself. "There are still some uses, you bastard." Soo-hyuk spat while clenching the fan in one of his hands and gritting his teeth. "I wanted to get out of this alive with my allies if possible. But, hashtag uses remaining, 4. Excluding himself, exactly 4 members of Blue Eyes were still alive. "Banana palm fan, blow them away," he shouted, causing a storm to blow his 4 guild members far away in different directions. It was a gamble on his part. There was no guarantee his critically wounded comrades would be saved, but it was the best option he had. "Gee, go after them," the head of the Nambung clan shouted in surprise. The Murim Alliance's players turned to follow the 4 departing Blue Eyes players, but they were stopped when they heard an ominous voice. "You guys have to deal with me first. You all know who'll come out on top, right?" Of course, Soo-hyuk was spouting nonsense. Dozens of spears and knives were sticking out of him, and the Hydra's poison continued to eat away at his body. On top of that, Kim Il-soo, Blue Zone, and the others were all top-tier players. Even though their opponent was Lee Soo-hyuk, there was no way he'd survive. For some reason, though, his fierce shout didn't seem like a bluff. "BZZT. The Master of Lightning is manifesting. Your fatigue is high. The duration of Master of Lightning is limited." Your fatigue has increased to 96. Such things didn't matter to Suhayok as he burned his remaining strength. Flash! A single bolt of lightning fell from the sky. For some mysterious reason, it shone with black light and fell above Suhayok's head. The size of the bolt was insignificant. Usually, the entire visible area around him was covered in electricity when he used the skill, but the area of the skill didn't change its essence. Master of Lightning? He still has enough strength to use that? This crazy bastard. Suhayok took a step forward as the enemies retreated. You guys aren't going anywhere. Back in his battle stance, he gripped the spear stuck in his abdomen and pulled it out through his torn muscles and guts. Along with the intense pain and bleeding, he saw his fatigue rise to 97 in a new message window. This weapon should be enough. Clack. Thud. Suhayok removed his mask, revealing his fiery eyes. Let's see things through until the end. Using the spear that had pierced him, he started his final fight. His submerged consciousness gradually resurfaced. It felt as if his soul were floating around, and Suhayok recalled his final fight before he died. Was it about half? He'd believed it was too late to survive anyway, so he'd used all of his remaining magic power and stamina in his final show of defiance. He'd managed to kill half of his opponents, and he'd even melted half of Kim Il-soo's face. The man probably wouldn't die, but he'd live with the scars for the rest of his life. Should I be happy? Considering the state of his body, he believed he'd done well. Still, he couldn't help but feel regretful. He at least wished he'd been able to take that bastard, Kim Il-soo, with him. If he hadn't hit 100 fatigue and fainted at the last moment, he would have had his wish too. Anyway, this is amazing. I never imagined I'd be able to continue thinking after death. Naturally, it was his first time experiencing death, so the sensation was new to him. He couldn't see anything in the complete darkness. He hadn't even experienced such darkness since he received optimized vision after becoming a player. His other senses were similarly affected. He couldn't hear or feel anything. It was like all 5 of his senses, which he'd always kept on high alert, were gone. Only one sense remained. His sense of self and thoughts floated somewhere. Will I be stuck like this forever? Isn't this, in a way, torture? Suhayok frowned as a strange stench filled his nose. It was like his nose was being buried in an old pile of garbage. I feel like vomiting. Huh! Words unconsciously slipped out of his mouth. Along with that, he also realized he was frowning. That meant he had a body. But why couldn't he see anything? He hurriedly tried to get up as sensation slowly returned to his hands and feet. At that moment, the lid covering his head fell to the ground, and Suhayok was able to take a look at where he was. Clank. Thud. He was in a heap of trash. After climbing out of it, he muttered, "Am I in hell?